we start. Hello, everybody. So we here at Renewables in Africa. We're having somebody very, very interesting from the continent. So we're talking to Mr. Prashaen Reddy. Hello, Prashaen. How are you?
Hi, Tony. I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for inviting me to be as part of your podcast.
I have to say it's an honor. It's definitely an honor. I was going to go and introduce yourself, but I thought it's probably better to let you the chance to do so. But just to set the context, just to say that obviously we live in a particular time, special time for the continent, but also for the world, I have to say. So everybody is asking questions about what's going to happen to the industry, what's going to happen to renewables, what's going to happen to people first, and healthcare. Right, so obviously, we are not healthcare specialists, although energy feeds quite well into healthcare. But what we know is actually the current crisis is having tremendous impact, right? As we were talking, you and I before, we're talking about the emergence of renewable, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So is that okay with you, Prashaen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Yes.
just to give justice to the fantastic career that you've been able to accomplish so far, would you mind please introducing yourself and also the company or companies you're working for?
Yes. No, thanks, Tony. I think just by way of introduction, so yes, Prashaen Reddy. I'm a principal at Kearney, which is a global management consulting firm, and we work in many industries, but energy is one of our bigger industries. I lead a lot of our work on the African continent as well as in the Middle East, but have done some work as well in the US and in Asia as well in the energy space. I've been in this industry for some time now, around 16, 17 years. And I also work with the South African National Energy Association, which is where I'm a director on the board. And there we really focus across energy topics, from nuclear to coal to gas to oil and to renewables, and as it's been a significantly growing portion of where we are going with energy. And I enjoy. I think there's a great opportunity in Africa, and I enjoy working with clients, with communities, in how we can actually unlock and enable, energy as the lifeblood for what I believe will be growth for Africa.
Okay, thanks for that. I think we're definitely talking to the right man here. So before we dive in more into the questions, right? So I think everybody seems to be COVID these days. But let's step back a bit. According to you, why is renewable important for Africa and the world, but especially Africa and South Africa, obviously?
Yes. So I think in other forms of energy feedstock like oil and gas, coal, is really dependent on, one, where the feedstock exists. So energy is generated by either having oil or importing it, or gas or coal, etc. So I think it's large scale, big infrastructure programs to actually unlock and really create energy, for those particular commodities. But if you look at renewables, it's a very different story. So renewables, if we can switch off the sun, that would be nice, but we can't, right? So we actually have a resource that is abundantly available to us in many regions of the world, and including in Africa, that can be utilized in various areas, in remote parts, in wherever you would like to closer to communities, powering communities. So you can imagine the benefits of being able to modularize energy, let's call it that, and where you can distribute it to where it's needed. And so therefore the dependency on how you build infrastructure, how you invest in infrastructure, how you get energy to where it needs to go is very different compared to gas and oil and a number of the other types of energy resources. And of course, then there's the environmental agenda, which everybody fully understands. Of course, renewables is around protecting our environment and reducing our emissions and making the world, a greener place to work in. So, in my view, it's certainly going to provide and unlock opportunities for countries that are not resource rich in terms of oil, gas, coal, and countries that are. But I think that the cost of a lot of developing renewable projects have really fallen It's very competitive nowadays to actually, introduce renewables into the energy mix. So, there isn't a reason why we shouldn't be doing more of it, other than the challenges on storage and those kind of things. But that we will get there. There's a lot of research and development going into enabling renewables to be sort of a base load type energy, where you can actually have it, when you need it. Not when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. You need to obviously think about that as well. But I do believe it has the ability to enable our energy distribution much more effectively going forward.
That's great, because I can see you speaking my language here. So taking renewable to baseload, our baseload source. So that's great. So you sit on the board of the South African National Energy Association. Can I ask you, prior to COVID, what was the situation for renewables in South Africa?
Yeah, I think so. As you would know, in South Africa, we launched a renewables independent power program. I don't know, it's probably about 6 years now ago, maybe a little bit longer, and that's been very successful. So we've procured a lot of renewable energy in the country. Lots of new players have been introduced, and really a market started to be created. But the biggest challenge we have is, of course, how do we balance that with typically a very closed electricity system that's been managed by, an incumbent company that really, generates most of our electricity from coal. And that's been the challenge, because, it's about how do you integrate renewables into a system that's been so mature and so monopolistic, for a long time, because it's a state-owned sort of entity. So I think that's been part of the challenge. We certainly have, the ambitions, and the sector's been growing. It's about 6% of our mix, and we're going to grow to about 26% of our mix by 2030. So there's the ambition in the sectors there, and certainly the investment's been there, and the projects have been there, and we've now got a good supply of renewables in the country. So pre-COVID, I would say that the outlook was there for renewable companies. The government has clear plans, and we've executed on those plans, and it opened up even a new renewable IPP program window for this year, the fifth window. But at the beginning of the year, the government made a very important sort of commitment to the energy sector and to the public of South Africa. And they said that industry and municipalities can now procure independent power beyond the likes of the state-owned company Eskom. And that then opens up the sector much more to allowing industries and municipalities to start to really utilize renewable energy as an option going forward. And so I think that where we were pre-COVID was very optimistic. I think a lot of work has been done in terms of the projects. But obviously now with demand falling with COVID, many things are slowing down, and sort of the momentum that was gathered is probably going to be slowed down a bit.
Okay, so let me just jump on that. So you say, obviously, you mentioned some of the potential issues there. Can I ask you please to expand a bit more into how the current crisis has affected the sector in South Africa for sure in particular, but also more in Africa in general, because I know as well you have quite a broad view on Africa as well.
Yeah, so I always say Africa is more than 50 countries, so it's very difficult. I never want to, brush it with one broad brush stroke. But I'll give a bit of my comments on it from an overall perspective. But for South Africa, for sure, I think it's quite clear that the overall energy sector has taken a huge knock in terms of demand, right? And if you're familiar with the sort of energy crisis we're having in the country in South Africa related to demand and supply, you would know that we've had lots of rolling blackouts, in South Africa to keep, because the supply and demand, demand is exceeding supply at this moment in time because of an aging fleet that Eskom is running. So I think we're now in a situation where we have no rolling blackouts. And the reason for that is because there's no demand. Demand has really stopped. We've stopped industries, we've stopped mining, we've stopped manufacturing, and therefore, demand has really fallen. So that creates a problem for the energy sector in that revenue is obviously fallen. And because of that, the impact to the renewable sector is in twofold. One, it is that, those that have sort of power purchase agreements with the big utility for transmission, are struggling to now also supply that into the grid, because there's just no demand to absorb that electricity. So that's allowing a slowdown of generation of power. And if you have seen some of the moves that Eskom has come out and said that they're declaring a force majeure with some of the renewables players, because they just do not have the demand in this crisis that was completely unexpected. So there's a lot of challenging times happening in the renewable sector around demand. And then the other piece is on the project side. So commissioning a renewables project is probably the worst time to do it, because you've got you can't bring on projects that are just not going to be able to supply electricity if there's no demand. So I think part of it is relooking at projects and the portfolios, and how do you where do you focus now? Because you're going to have to, certainly most of these projects are going to be delayed. Within the next 18 months, I think if there's any project that was going to be commissioned by at least another quarter to 2 quarters, they would delay their commissioning because it wouldn't make sense. So I think the sector has been quite severely impacted because of the drop in significant demand, and of course because of the control of how the electricity system is set up. I think you find that the big incumbents are not able to take on all of this electricity that we can generate from renewable sources onto the grid. I don't think Africa is immune to that. I think you start to find similar issues in terms of projects and demand, as many countries are going through similar lockdowns and shutting down industries to protect their people. That's going to create a drop in demand, and because of that, you're going to naturally find these companies that are severely impacted. Of course, electricity always remains an essential service, let's call it that, but it can't scale up to its regular sort of performance without having the demand there.
Okay, I think that's a terrific answer. And another part of this crisis, especially on the energy, and obviously what is happening with oil prices, which everybody been saying are dropping. So according to you, does it sort of accelerate or slowing down the take up on renewable? What's your take on it?
Yeah, so if the fall in oil prices, what's the implications for renewables? I guess that's the question, yeah? Yeah, so I think the fall in oil and gas prices have an implication. One, I think you're going to find a slowdown naturally in investments in oil and gas, because the revenue is not going to be there to substantiate any big projects. And I do believe that the outlook for renewables hasn't changed. So, the overall strategy, the vision of renewables, the regulation, the policy, that's not changed because COVID's arrived or the oil prices has declined, right? So if anything, it's going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate that, because if you can't invest in oil and gas and you're investing in energy, where are you going to invest then, right? And you won't invest in coal, because again, coal comes with heavy implications from a carbon perspective, and a lot of policy not supporting that. So renewables becomes quite an attractive option. Nuclear is also not an option, right? It's also one of those energy types that is also going to struggle to attract investment. So renewables is the place to invest in, if you think about it, because it doesn't look like the future. It looks any dimmer. It looks a lot brighter. And with most of the world still putting policies in place, the fact that they will transition most of their energy needs to renewables, it's just a no-brainer, right? That's where, if I was an investor, I would look. And it's not a short-term investment. So yes, we're going through a crisis now, and it's this next few quarters and the next half year are going to be challenging demand-wise. But you're going to find that things will resume. In 18 months' time, we'll be looking at a very different picture. So will an investor they'll be cautious, but if they're going to select an energy source to invest in, there's no better resource than renewables.
Okay, that's a great news. In fact, you definitely pleading for a green recovery. So I think hopefully that will be the case, and people will listen to you. So you put out recently, I think, a number of articles that appeared in different platforms, and then where you were talking about um, the international examples and how South Africa as a country can learn from that, and obviously I would expand into Africa even as a whole. Would you mind sharing your perspective into that? So how can we learn from these international example, and how can we at the same time push that green recovery?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what we've been seeing across the world is, of course, firstly, the sector has been impacted by the lockdown, supply chains, sourcing, capital goods to build projects and to run projects has been a challenge. So of course, naturally, that's caused an issue to progress things. Demand, like I said, has fallen off, and the prices of oil and gas have really declined. So this is the environment renewables finds itself in. And I think, what many companies have been looking at is probably three things. One is related to their portfolios and saying, okay, where's the best economic value to be invested in, and actually going, we need to slow down some of these projects or speed up other ones where we can see. So it's almost taking an analysis during these COVID crises to try and reprioritize that portfolio to ensure that you pick the right projects. It's not about stopping completely, because like I said, the picture hasn't changed for renewables, not just because COVID arrived or Saudi and Russia decided to have a war on the oil price. This hasn't changed the picture of where we're going as a world. So it still makes sense to continue these projects. It still makes sense but it's been prudent and slowing and focusing where we continue to invest in projects, etc. The second point is, as you would know, projects of this nature generally tend to be very waterfall oriented. What do I mean by that? I mean that we want to build everything and switch it all and commission it all on and then say we're done, right? And I think what we're starting to see is people starting to think in a bit of a more agile way and modular way. So you've got a big project, you almost want to scale down to scale up, because in these kind of times, the demand's just not going to be there for you to introduce large amounts of renewable projects. So start to think cleverly about how you can bring on projects in a more modular way and in a more agile way to allow you to be more flexible in these projects, because that's going to help, right? As demand does pick up, because it will pick up. And by the way, just remember, this is different to other crises that we've had in financial sectors, because this is an artificially suppressed demand. We have deliberately, as a world, decided to stop production. We have not decided, this has not been a financial crash where the markets have gone into turmoil and it's related to a more fundamental economic issue. This is related to a health issue, and we have depressed demand deliberately because we want to protect people. So you're going to find a resumption, a very different resumption to other crises, right? Of how we get back to maybe some sensible levels of demand. We will have to recover. It will still be a recovery process, but therefore the demand will come. And because the demand is going to come, it's about being prepared in a more agile way, more flexible way, more modular way, and really looking at how you can start to look at projects in that way, in that form. And then the last point is just sort of working cleverly around being more resilient, because you're going to find that this intermittency of demand is going to affect your business, right? And you're going to have to, either have a very really great shareholders and investors who can see the value of these assets and sort of ensure that financially we can navigate it. Look for government support. Look to work more aggressively with the off-takers of power to understand how do you consider this as a partnership, because it is a partnership, and you don't want to you don't want to kill all of these great renewables companies that have bright futures, but just because we've gone through this dip of slowing demand, we kill the sector. So I think that requires a number of parties to work together to achieve that. But I think everybody would have those interests at heart as well. So, I mean, that's kind of the trends we've been seeing in the sector around how the renewables companies have been looking at and navigating COVID. And it's really about seeing out, I would say, the next 6 to 12 months of instability as we start to get back to not normal, but getting back to normal.
Okay, the new normal that people have said over time. So that's
Yes.
fantastic what you've said, because I think if you summarize that in three words, you say we need to be agile, we need to be flexible, and we need to be resilient. So in a word, you want SME to behave like big companies and big companies to behave like SMEs. So that's a great way to put that thing. So
Sure.
Prashaen, it was a pleasure for me talking to you today. So looking at how the sector and the continent can cope with the current crisis. I can see that you definitely are optimistic and we like it, and we like the fantastic work that you're doing. All that is left for me to say is thank you very much for giving us a bit of your very busy time, because I know you told me you're busier than usual, and
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
surely should be able to see you back in our platform in a short while. So thank you for today.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me. Thank you for all the good work you're doing for renewables in Africa, and it's been a pleasure. And like I can say, now is the best time to look forward. So uh, that's why I'm optimistic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right.